It's after midnight in the southern Caribbean. A small boat is running flat out across open water, no lights, no flag, 4 outboard engines screaming into the dark. On board, a few men lie low against the hull. They think the night is hiding them. It isn't. 15,000 feet above, something has been watching that boat since the moment it left the coast of Venezuela. And in a few seconds, with no warning shot, no boarding party, no American ever setting foot on that deck, the boat simply ceases to exist. For decades, this was a chase. A cat-and-mouse game played out across the Caribbean, speedboat against cutter, and it almost always ended the same way: a seizure, a few arrests, and the trade rolling on by morning. Then, in the fall of 2025, the United States tore up the rulebook. And what replaced the chase hadn't been seen in this hemisphere since 1989. The Superhighway 4, as long as anyone can remember, one stretch of coast has been the start line for this run. The Paria Peninsula, on Venezuela's northern edge. Every night, go-fast boats slip out of fishing villages there low in the water, heavy with cocaine, pointed at Trinidad, then the islands, and on toward Europe. And here's the first thing the headline gets wrong. These boats were never charging American warships. They were trying to sneak past them to thread a gap in a wall of destroyers and vanish into the dark before anyone noticed. For years, sneaking past mostly worked, because the response was law enforcement, not war. A patrol plane or a Coast Guard cutter would catch a suspicious contact high speed, no lights, running an evasive line and move in. Sometimes a sharpshooter in a helicopter would fire a few precise rounds and kill the engines right off the back of the boat. Then a team would board, seize the drugs, arrest the crew, and haul them back for trial. Chase, board, seize, repeat. For the cartels, it was simply a cost of doing business. That was the game. It was about to end. The Armada in August 2025, the ship stopped being a patrol and became a wall. Into a patch of sea the U.S. Navy almost never crowds. Southern Command poured a force built for a real war. Guided missile destroyers the Gravely, the Mason, the Jason Dunham, and more, an amphibious assault ship carrying Marines, a Los Angeles-class attack submarine somewhere in the deep, and Marine F-35B stealth fighters staged in Puerto Rico. Overhead, P-8 Poseidon patrol planes raked the water with radar. Now consider the mismatch. The most powerful navy in the history of the world, assembling to hunt a 39-foot fiberglass boat. That is the contrast at the dead center of this whole story. A 100,000-ton response to a 2,000-kilogram problem. And within weeks, that response turned lethal. The first shot September 1st, 2025. A go-fast boat leaves San Juan de Unare, a fishing village on the Paria Peninsula that had quietly been converted into a smuggling hub. It is tracked from the instant it clears the shore. Under the old rules, this ends with a boarding team. Under the new rules, it doesn't. On the president's orders, an MQ-9 Reaper drone puts a Hellfire missile into the boat. 11 people are killed. No interdiction. No arrest. Just a fireball on black water, filmed from directly overhead and, within hours, posted online for the world, with a blunt warning to anyone thinking about moving drugs toward the United States. The Secretary of State said the quiet part out loud. Instead of stopping the boat and grabbing the drugs, he told an interviewer, "We blew it up." And it'll happen again. According to the Wall Street Journal, it was the U.S. military's first openly acknowledged airstrike in Central or South America since the invasion of Panama in 1989. Venezuela's president warned that Washington was being pulled toward a bloodbath and a wider war across the region. But the line was already crossed. The chase was over. The hunt had begun. The hunter and the hunted. So, how do you erase a speedboat from 3 miles up? Meet the hunter. The MQ-9 Reaper has no cockpit and nobody on board. It's flown by a 2-person crew sitting in a ground station that might be on another continent. Under its nose rides a sensor ball packed with an infrared camera, a daylight camera, and a laser designator. In the dark, a boat's engines burn white-hot against cold water like a candle in a blacked-out room, and the Reaper can loiter for the better part of a day. Just watching. When it's cleared to strike, the answer is already hanging under its wing: the AGM-114 Hellfire. A Hellfire is a 7-inch wide missile that arrives at over 1,000 miles an hour and drives a shaped charge warhead into its target before it detonates. Against a tank, that's a serious threat. Against an open fiberglass hull sitting on top of its own fuel tanks, it's no contest the boat comes apart in a single frame. And here's the honest thing about those boats: at their one job, they are genuinely good. 60, 70 knots in calm seas. A fiberglass hull that barely dents a radar screen. Painted gray to melt into the ocean, running dark, sometimes several at once to swamp anyone trying to stop them. Against a Coast Guard cutter, that is a real fight. Against a missile fired from 15,000 feet by something you can't see or hear, there is no fight at all. That gap between a fast boat and a patient drone is the real center of this story. It happened again, and it did happen again. And again. And again. September 15th, another boat. 3 more dead. Then a third. A fourth. By mid-October, the campaign had a name: Operation Southern Spear, and a dedicated joint task force to run it. The strike spread from the Caribbean into the Eastern Pacific. On 1 October night, the U.S. hit what it said was a narco submarine, a semi-submersible built to run just beneath the surface. Another strike was logged as the first carried out in darkness. Then, on November 16th, the escalation reached its outer edge. The USS Gerald R. Ford, the largest warship ever built, 1,100 feet of nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, sailed into the Caribbean. Sit with the scale of that for a second: the Navy's single most powerful ship on Earth and dozens of its aircraft committed against targets the size of fishing boats. By the summer of 2026, the numbers the United States reported were stark. 66 strikes. More than 200 people killed. A handful captured. A trafficking problem that had always been handled as law enforcement was now being answered with lethal force from the air, and the count kept climbing. What no one talks about now, the part the highlight reel leaves out, because a story this lopsided raises hard questions, and honesty demands we ask them. Start with that very first strike. Weeks later, it emerged that survivors had been left alive in the water after the boat was destroyed, and that a second strike was ordered that killed them. The White House confirmed the second strike happened and defended it as within the law. The Pentagon later said the rules were changed to allow rescuing survivors going forward. However you land on it, this is not the clean, bloodless victory the first announcement made it sound like. Then there's the question of who was on the boats. The U.S. labeled these crews as members of terror-designated groups like Tren de Aragua, but it has rarely produced public evidence tying a specific vessel to that gang, and analysts point out Tren de Aragua isn't really a seagoing trafficking organization in the first place. Venezuela disputed the identifications outright. And the cargo. The campaign was sold as protecting American streets. Yet reporting indicates most of these boats were carrying cocaine bound for Europe, not fentanyl bound for the United States, which quietly undercuts the headline reason for the whole operation. Finally, the law itself. The administration argued it was waging an armed conflict against non-state armed groups, which is what lets it shoot to kill rather than arrest. Human rights experts and many legal scholars called that a rebranding of something older and uglier, killing on suspicion without trial at sea. Twice, the U.S. Senate declined to require that these strikes get congressional sign-off. This is not a settled question. It's an open one and a serious one. The bigger picture, so what actually happened near Venezuela? Not boats charging the Navy and getting swatted out of the water. Something bigger and stranger than that. A government looked at a problem it had chased for 40 years and decided to stop chasing. It reclassified the smugglers as an enemy in a war, and it brought the machine it had spent 2 decades building in the skies over Iraq and Afghanistan back home to its own hemisphere. The drones, the sensors, the missiles. And the campaign didn't stop at boats. In January 2026, US forces captured Venezuela's president himself and flew him out of the country. Months later, the leader of Trinidad was killed in a joint operation. The message to anyone leaving that coast on a known route is now brutally simple. No chase. No boarding. No cell. Just a voice in a headset 1,000 miles away and a few seconds of falling metal. The rules that changed overnight for decades, the drug war at sea was a chase you could survive. Get caught and you might lose the cargo. Maybe your freedom, but you'd live. In the fall of 2025, that stopped being true. The boats never really ran at the US Navy. They tried to slip past it, the way they always had. What changed wasn't the boats, it was what waited above them, and the decision to stop making arrests and start making examples. 66 strikes. More than 200 dead. A carrier parked in the Caribbean just to underline the point. Whether you see that as a long overdue reckoning, or as a dangerous line the country stepped across without ever really debating it, that may be the biggest argument nobody's fully having. So I'll put it to you. Was this the moment America finally got serious about the cartels, or the moment it traded the courtroom for the crosshairs and never looked back? Tell me in the comments. Hit like, subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.